The arena stretched before them like a metal bowl carved into the asteroid's heart. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood at the viewing platform's edge, her hands gripping the rail as she watched the Karathi warriors below. Their blue-scaled bodies moved with deadly grace, each motion a promise of violence. The crowd's roar echoed through the chamber, a sound that made her bones vibrate. Fascinating display, isn't it? The voice belonged to General Vextar, his four arms crossed behind his back in what humans had learned was the Galactic Coalition's equivalent of casual confidence. The Zirian's purple skin gleamed under the arena lights, and his three eyes focused on Sarah with what she had come to recognize as barely concealed contempt. Sarah kept her expression neutral. 3 months of diplomatic training on New Geneva had taught her to read alien body language, but, more importantly, it had taught her to hide her own reactions. The Karathi are impressive fighters. Indeed, Vextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species, which makes today's proceedings all the more interesting. Your species' application for military partnership status comes at a most opportune time. Below them, 2 Karathi warriors circled each other in the practice ring. Their movements were hypnotic, each step calculated to maximum advantage. Sarah had spent weeks studying their combat forms through archive footage, but seeing them in person was different. The raw power in their strikes, the precision of their defensive stances, the way they seemed to anticipate their opponents' moves before they happened. The Karathi have been our primary shock troops for nearly 2 centuries, Vextar continued, his tone conversational despite the underlying message. When worlds resist coalition integration, we send them. The sight of a Karathi battle line has ended more conflicts than our entire diplomatic corps. Sarah nodded, though her stomach churned. She had read the reports. Entire civilizations had surrendered rather than face Karathi warriors in battle. Their reputation was built on more than skill. It was built on the psychological impact of facing opponents who seemed to feel no fear, no hesitation, no doubt. Your species, however, Vextar's central eye fixed on her while the other 2 continued watching the arena, presents us with certain challenges. How so? Sarah kept her voice level, though she knew exactly where this conversation was heading. Humans are curious creatures, physically weak by galactic standards. Your bone density is laughable, your muscle mass insufficient, your reflexes slower than most predator species. But what truly concerns us is your psychological profile. The arena fell silent as the 2 Karathi warriors touched weapons in the traditional salute. Sarah used the moment to study Vextar's expression. The general's reputation preceded him. 3 successful campaigns against rebellious systems, architect of the coalition's current military doctrine, and, notably, the being responsible for approving or denying humanity's bid for military partnership. Our scientists have completed extensive studies of human behavior, Vextar resumed. The results are troubling. Your species shows remarkable innovation under pressure. Yes, problem-solving abilities that exceed most coalition members, certainly. But courage? His mandibles clicked again. That remains highly questionable. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to remain calm. I'm not sure I understand your concern, General. Don't you? Vextar gestured toward the arena with one of his lower arms. Courage is the foundation of military effectiveness. A soldier who hesitates, who questions orders, who allows fear to cloud judgment. Such a being is not merely useless, they are dangerous to their comrades. The Karathi warriors began their bout. Their movements exploded into violence so sudden that Sarah's human eyes struggled to track them. Bladed weapons met with metallic rings that punctuated the air like gunshots. Neither warrior showed any sign of fear, any hesitation. They fought with the mechanical precision of machines programmed for war. Your species' history suggests a troubling pattern, Vextar continued. Humans consistently seek alternatives to direct confrontation. Diplomacy over warfare. Negotiation over conquest. These traits, while admirable in civilian populations, indicate a fundamental lack of warrior spirit. Sarah watched one of the Karathi warriors land a strike, that would have killed any human instantly. His opponent absorbed the blow and countered without missing a beat. Blue blood streamed down his arm, but his expression never changed. Furthermore, Vextar's voice took on a lecturing tone. Human military history shows concerning patterns of hesitation during critical moments. Your soldiers question orders, your commanders second-guess strategies, your populations protest military actions. This suggests a species fundamentally unsuited for the realities of galactic warfare. With respect, General, Sarah finally spoke, I think you may be misunderstanding human nature. All three of Vextar's eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. Oh, please enlighten me. Sarah took a breath, choosing her words carefully. Courage isn't the absence of fear, General. It's acting despite fear. Humans don't lack courage. We simply express it differently than species who have had fear bred out of them. An interesting theory. Vextar's tone suggested he found it anything but interesting. However, theory and practice are often quite different things. Which brings us to why you're here today. Below, the Karathi bout had intensified. The crowd's roar grew louder as one warrior gained advantage, pressing his opponent back toward the arena's edge. Sarah noticed how the losing warrior never showed any sign of panic, never broke formation, never attempted anything desperate. He fought with the same methodical precision, even as defeat became inevitable. The Coalition Council has decided that humanity's military potential requires practical evaluation, Vextar announced. Not theoretical discussion, not simulation, not historical analysis. Direct, observable testing under controlled conditions. Sarah's diplomatic training kicked in, flooding her mind with protocols and procedures. What kind of testing? Combat evaluation, of course. Vextar gestured toward the arena below. Tomorrow, a human representative will face a Korathi warrior in traditional challenge combat. Single combat, weapons of choice, victory determined by surrender or incapacitation. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped the rail harder, her knuckles turning white. General, surely there are other ways to evaluate. The decision has been made. Vextar's voice carried the finality of absolute authority. The Coalition requires proof of human courage under direct threat. Your species claims equality with established military powers. Very well. Prove it. Below them, the Karathi bout ended with surgical precision. The victor's weapon stopped a hair's width from his opponent's throat. Both warriors stepped back and saluted with mechanical efficiency. The crowd cheered, but neither fighter acknowledged the sound. Who will represent humanity? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. That choice belongs to your delegation, Ambassador. Choose wisely. The outcome of this challenge will determine not merely your species' military status, but your entire relationship with the Coalition moving forward. Sarah felt the weight of 60 billion human lives settling on her shoulders. Earth population depended on Coalition membership for trade, technology, and protection from hostile species beyond their borders. Without military partnership status, humanity would remain relegated to second-class citizenship, forever dependent on alien protection. When do you need our answer? The challenge has been scheduled for tomorrow at mid-cycle. Your representative should report to the arena preparation chambers 1 standard hour before. Vextar turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Ambassador? Choose someone expendable. Karathi warriors don't often leave their opponents merely defeated. As Vextar walked away, Sarah remained at the rail, staring down at the empty arena. The implications crashed over her in waves. She thought of the human delegation currently aboard the Coalition station, 12 diplomats, 6 military advisors, 8 technical specialists, and a handful of support staff. None of them were combat specialists. None had trained for this kind of challenge. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender was Admiral James Morrison, head of Earth's military delegation. The message was brief. Emergency meeting. Conference room 7. Now, Sarah took one last look at the arena before heading toward what she knew will be the most important meeting in human history. Somewhere in the station's corridors, she would have to find someone willing to face a Korathi warrior in single combat. Someone willing to risk everything on humanity's behalf. The irony wasn't lost on her. Vextar questioned human courage, but he was about to discover what humans were truly capable of when everything they valued was at stake. Conference Room 7 was cramped by human standards, though it accommodated most coalition species comfortably. The 12 members of humanity's delegation sat around a hexagonal table that had been designed for beings with different body configurations. Sarah noticed how small and fragile her colleagues looked compared to the alien furniture. Admiral Morrison stood at the room's front, his weathered face grim. At 63, he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had spent 4 decades making impossible decisions. His gray hair was cropped short in military fashion, and his dress uniform bore the ribbons of campaigns fought in Earth's solar system. I assume everyone has been briefed on General Vextar's challenge. Morrison began without preamble. We have 18 hours to select a representative for single combat against a Korathi warrior. Dr. Elizabeth Foster, the delegation's xenobiologist, raised her hand. Admiral, I've been studying Korathi physiology for the past 3 months. Their bone density is roughly 3 times human normal. Their muscle fiber composition gives them strength-to-weight ratios we simply cannot match. Their nervous system processes combat information approximately 40% faster than human optimal. Thank you, Doctor. Morrison's voice carried no emotion. Are you recommending we forfeit? I'm recommending we understand what we're facing. Foster pulled up a holographic display of Korathi anatomy. This isn't David versus Goliath. David had reach advantage and superior weapons technology. Our representative will face an opponent who is stronger, faster, more durable, and trained from birth for combat. Commander Lisa Park, Morrison's aide-de-camp, leaned forward. What weapons are permitted? Sarah consulted her notes. Traditional combat weapons, bladed weapons, impact weapons, projectile weapons of pre-industrial technology levels. No energy weapons, no powered armor, no technological enhancements beyond basic metallurgy. So, swords, spears, bows, that sort of thing? Morrison nodded slowly. That actually works in our favor. Human metallurgy and weapon design evolved under different pressures than most coalition species. Admiral Dr. Chen Wei, the delegation's cultural specialist, spoke up. I must point out that this challenge isn't merely about combat effectiveness. It's a test of courage, as General Vextar made clear. The coalition needs to see that humans won't break under pressure. Morrison turned to study the room's occupants. Which brings us to our central problem. None of us are combat specialists. Our security detail consists of 4 personnel trained in defensive operations, not single combat. Sarah felt every eye in the room turned toward her. She had mentioned her background to Morrison during the flight to coalition space, but hadn't emphasized it. Admiral, I should mention that I have some relevant experience. How relevant? Sarah took a breath. I competed in historical European martial arts tournaments for 8 years before joining the diplomatic corps. Longsword, rapier, some polearm work. I was ranked 3rd in the North American circuit. The room fell silent. Morrison studied her with new interest. Combat experience? Tournament fighting only, sir. But I understand sword work, and I've trained under stress conditions. She paused, then added honestly, though nothing like what I'd face tomorrow. Commander Park frowned. With respect, Ambassador, tournament fighting isn't the same as life or death combat. No, it isn't. Sarah met Park's gaze steadily. But it's closer than anything else we have available. Dr. Foster shook her head. This is suicide. We're talking about sending a diplomat with hobby-level sword training against a being literally bred for war. Do we have alternatives? Morrison's question hung in the air like a challenge. The room remained silent for long moments. Finally, Dr. Martin Hayes, the delegation's senior advisor, spoke up. We could request a postponement. Claim we need time to consult with Earth. General Vextar was clear, Sarah replied. The challenge is scheduled for tomorrow. Any delay would be seen as evidence of human cowardice. Morrison walked to the room's viewport and stared out at the Coalition station's bustling docking bays. Ships from dozens of species came and went, their crews conducting business that kept the galaxy's economy functioning. Humanity desperately wanted to be part of that community as equals, not perpetual clients. Ambassador Chun, Morrison said without turning around, "Are you volunteering?" Sarah felt her heart rate spike, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, sir. I am." "You understand the stakes?" "I understand that refusing this challenge condemns humanity to second-class status indefinitely. I understand that our children will grow up in a galaxy where humans are seen as cowards who hide behind alien protection. And I understand that someone has to take this risk." Morrison turned back to face the room. "Anyone else willing to volunteer?" No one spoke. Sarah saw the conflict in their faces, relief that someone had stepped forward, guilt that it wasn't them, fear for what would happen tomorrow. "Very well." Morrison's voice carried formal authority. "Ambassador Chun, you will represent humanity in tomorrow's challenge. We have 18 hours to prepare. I want every piece of information about Karathi combat techniques downloaded and analyzed. Dr. Foster, I need detailed biological data, vulnerabilities, limitations, anything that might help. Commander Park, work with the ambassador on equipment selection and tactical planning." As the meeting broke up, Morrison approached Sarah privately. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah looked out at the alien ships in the docking bay, then thought of Earth's cities, its children, its future. "Admiral, courage isn't about being sure. It's about doing what needs to be done despite uncertainty." Morrison nodded slowly. "Then, God help us all." Sarah spent the first 6 hours reviewing everything humanity knew about Karathi combat techniques. The Coalition's public archives contained detailed recordings of their warriors in action, and every video reinforced Dr. Foster's grim assessment. The blue-scaled fighters moved like living weapons, each motion economical and devastating. "They never waste energy on flashy moves," Commander Park observed as they watched a training sequence. "Every strike serves a tactical purpose, either to damage, to create openings, or to control distance." Dr. Foster highlighted specific anatomical details on her medical scanner. "Notice how they pivot from their core rather than their feet. Their spinal structure allows rotational movements that would cripple a human, but it gives them tremendous power generation." Sarah studied the fighters' techniques with growing appreciation for their skill. These weren't mindless brutes. They were artists of violence, practitioners of combat refined over countless generations. "What about weaknesses?" "Very few," Foster admitted. "Their scales provide natural armor against cutting weapons, but impact trauma can still affect them. Their joints are vulnerable, but good luck targeting something that small on an opponent moving that fast." Actually, Park pulled up a tactical analysis she had been working on. "I've noticed something interesting about their defensive patterns. They're optimized for fighting other Karathi." Sarah leaned closer to study the data. Meaning they expect certain types of attacks, certain ranges of motion, certain tactical approaches. They've been fighting the same way for so long that their responses have become instinctual. Park highlighted several combat sequences. "Watch how they react to overhead strikes. They always use the same counter." "Always. That could be useful," Sarah mused, "if I can create situations they're not used to dealing with." Dr. Chun Wei, who had remained quiet through most of the analysis, finally spoke up. "There's something else we need to consider. This isn't just about winning the fight. It's about demonstrating human courage to the entire coalition." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "Think about it from their perspective. They've studied human history, our psychology, our cultural patterns. They expect us to approach this challenge the way we approach everything else, with caution, with analysis, with attempts to minimize risk." Chenwei pulled up diplomatic reports from various coalition species. Every evaluation of humanity mentions our tendency to seek alternatives to direct confrontation. Sarah understood. "So even if I fight well, if I fight like they expect a human to fight, they'll see it as confirmation of their assumptions about our species. Methodical, careful, ultimately lacking the warrior spirit they respect. Commander Park nodded grimly. Which means you can't just win, Ambassador. You have to win in a way that changes their entire perception of what humans are capable of. The weight of that realization settled over them. Sarah wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting to redefine how an entire galaxy saw her species. Right? Sarah stood up, new determination flooding through her. Then, we need to give them something they're not expecting. The next phase of preparation took place in the station's combat training facility. The Coalition had provided access to a regulation arena identical to tomorrow's venue, complete with weapon racks and basic armor. Sarah selected her equipment with careful consideration of everything they had learned. Longsword, Park questioned her choice. Most Korathi favor shorter, more maneuverable weapons. Exactly. Sarah tested the weapons balance. The Coalition armory had provided human standard equipment, and the longsword felt familiar in her hands. They're used to fighting opponents with similar reach. This gives me options they won't be prepared for. She had also selected light armor, a padded jacket, and basic helmet that would provide some protection without restricting mobility. Against a Korathi's natural armor and speed, heavy protection would be more liability than asset. Remember, Dr. Foster called out as Sarah began practicing forms. Their reflexes are faster, but they have to process new information just like any other sentient being. If you can present them with situations outside their experience, you might create hesitation moments. Sarah worked through basic cuts and thrusts, feeling muscle memory return. Years of tournament training had built reactions that operated below conscious thought. Not as fast as Korathi reflexes, but fast enough to be useful. What about their psychology? That's harder to predict, Chunwei admitted. Korathi culture values honor in combat, but their definition of honor emphasizes effectiveness over style. They won't underestimate you just because you're human, but they might not expect certain tactical approaches. As Sarah continued training, she noticed station personnel gathering to watch. Word of tomorrow's challenge had spread throughout the Coalition facility, and beings from dozens of species came to observe humanity's preparation. Some watched with obvious curiosity, others with what appeared to be pity. No pressure, Park muttered under a breath. Admiral Morrison arrived during the 7th hour of training. He watched Sarah work through combat sequences without comment, his experienced eye evaluating her movements. When she paused for water, he approached. "How are you feeling?" Sarah wiped sweat from her face. "Terrified, sir, but ready." "Good. Terror keeps you alive. Overconfidence gets you killed." Morrison studied the watching aliens. "What's your plan?" "Give them something they've never seen before." Sarah hefted the long sword, feeling its weight. Korathi fight like machines. Perfect technique, optimal efficiency, no wasted motion. But machines can be predictable. And if predictability doesn't work? Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Then, I'll die trying to prove that humans don't break under pressure." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's all anyone can ask." The final hours passed quickly. Sarah alternated between physical preparation and mental conditioning, working to achieve the focused calm she remembered from major tournaments. But this was different. The stakes were impossibly high, and failure meant more than losing a match. Dr. Foster provided a final briefing on Korathi anatomy, highlighting the few vulnerable points Sarah might be able to exploit. Remember, their scales are weakest at the joints, shoulders, elbows, knees. But targeting those areas requires precision strikes under combat stress. Commander Park had prepared tactical scenarios, tried to anticipate different fighting styles Sarah might face. "We don't know which warrior you'll be fighting, so we can't predict their specific approach. But all Korathi share certain fundamental techniques." Chunwei offered cultural insight. "The challenge is being broadcast throughout Coalition space. Representatives from over 40 species will be watching. Your performance will influence how humanity is perceived for generations." As the 18th hour approached, Sarah felt the familiar pre-competition nerves that had once preceded tournament bouts. But underneath the fear was something else, a growing determination that surprised her with its intensity. She thought of Earth's children, of humanity's future, of the choice between dignity and safety. Admiral Morrison accompanied her to the arena preparation chambers. The facility was unlike anything in human experience. Walls that shifted color to optimize psychological conditioning, atmospheric controls that could simulate dozens of different planetary environments, medical scanners that could detect the slightest physical or mental imbalance. The Coalition certainly takes their combat seriously, Morrison observed. Sarah was fitted with monitoring equipment that would track her vital signs during the bout. Coalition regulations required detailed biometric data for all challenge participants, ostensibly for medical safety, but obviously for scientific study as well. First human to undergo challenge combat evaluation. The technician noted, its translator rendering its speech in flat, mechanical tones. Very interesting data for our researchers. Sarah tried not to think about becoming a scientific specimen. She focused instead on the sword in her hands, on the hours of preparation, on everything that depended on the next few minutes. General Vextar arrived as she completed equipment checks. His 3 eyes studied her with professional interest, showing neither hostility nor sympathy. Your opponent has been selected, he announced. Battle veteran Kree Ash, 17 successful challenges, specialist in blade combat. Sarah felt her stomach drop. 17 successful challenges meant her opponent had faced other species warriors and won every time. What can you tell me about his style? That would be inappropriate, Vextar replied. Challenge combat is meant to test adaptability as well as skill. Fair enough. Sarah had expected no assistance from the Coalition. This was humanity's test to pass or fail on their own merits. Ambassador, Vextar's voice carried an odd note. Your species' courage will be judged not merely by your performance, but by your conduct. The Coalition respects warriors who face death with dignity. Sarah looked up at the general's alien features, trying to read his expression. Was that advice? Warning? Or a simple statement of fact? I understand, General. Humanity won't disappoint you. Vextar's mandibles clicked once. We shall see. The arena doors opened, revealing the combat space Sarah had studied for hours but never entered. The metal bowl stretched before her, its surface marked with the scars of countless previous battles. Stadium seating rose around the perimeter, filled with beings from every major Coalition species. Sarah walked onto the arena floor, her sword held loosely at her side. The crowd's noise washed over her. Not the partisan cheering of human sporting events, but the analytical interest of beings evaluating a potentially important historical moment. Across the arena, another door opened. Battle veteran Kree Ash entered like controlled violence given form. The Karathi warrior stood nearly 7 feet tall, his blue scales catching the arena lights in patterns that suggested armor. Muscle moved beneath those scales with predatory grace, and his yellow eyes fixed on Sarah with the intensity of a natural-born killer. He carried a sword similar to Sarah's in length, but different in design, curved rather than straight, designed for slashing rather than thrusting. His armor was minimal, just enough to meet regulation requirements while preserving full mobility. The 2 fighters approached the arena center, stopping at the traditional challenge distance. Kree Ash studied Sarah with professional interest, his head tilting slightly as he evaluated her stance, her equipment, her apparent level of preparation. Human, he spoke in perfect Coalition standard, his voice carrying the mechanical precision of his species. You are smaller than expected. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Appearances can be deceiving. Indeed, Kree Ash raised his weapon in formal salute. I will make your death swift. That's kind of you, Sarah replied, returning the salute. But I prefer to postpone it indefinitely. For just a moment, something that might have been amusement flickered in the Karathi's eyes. Then, his expression returned to professional neutrality. The arena fell silent. General Vextar's voice echoed from the announcement systems. Challenge combat will commence on my signal. Victory by surrender or incapacitation. Combat will continue until one participant yields or cannot continue. Fighters ready. Sarah settled into guard position, her sword held in a standard longsword stance. Across from her, Kriash adopted a posture she didn't recognize. Weight evenly distributed, weapon held high, ready for either attack or defense. Begin. The word echoed through the arena like a gunshot. Sarah felt time slow as adrenaline flooded her system. Every detail became hyper-real. The texture of her sword's grip, the sound of her breathing, the way light reflected off Kriash's scales. The Karathi warrior moved first, closing distance with frightening speed. His blade came down in a perfect arc, aimed at Sarah's left shoulder with surgical precision. Sarah parried, metal ringing against metal with a sound that echoed through the arena. The impact nearly tore the sword from her hands. Kriash's strength was even greater than she had expected. But she had managed the parry, and now she had information. The Karathi fought exactly as the videos had shown. Perfect technique, overwhelming power, tactical precision. He expected her to fight the same way. Time to disappoint him. Instead of following up with a conventional counterattack, Sarah did something no Karathi would ever consider. She threw herself backward, rolling across the arena floor in a move that sacrificed all dignity for positional advantage. Kriash's follow-up strike cut through empty air where she had been standing. For just a moment, his perfect fighting stance was designed for an opponent who wasn't there. Sarah came up from her roll and launched herself forward, not at Kriash himself, but at his weapon. Her long sword struck his blade in a binding technique that had won her 3 tournament championships. The Karathi's superior strength meant he could break the bind easily, but it forced him to respond to her initiative instead of pressing his own attack. More importantly, it showed every being in the arena that the human wasn't fighting like they expected. Kriash adapted quickly, his yellow eyes showing new interest in his opponent. He began a series of probing attacks, testing Sarah's defenses with strikes that could easily escalate into killing blows. Sarah met each attack with responses that emphasized mobility over strength. When Kriash struck high, she went low. When he pressed forward, she circled away. When he tried to use his superior reach, she closed distance and fought from half-sword position. The crowd's noise grew louder as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a human fighting a Karathi warrior to a standstill through tactics no one had ever seen before. But Sarah knew she couldn't keep it up forever. Kriash was stronger, faster, and more skilled. Eventually, his superior abilities would tell. She needed to create a decisive moment before exhaustion gave him the advantage. The opportunity came when Kriash attempted a particularly aggressive combination, confident that his speed would overwhelm her defenses. Sarah parried the first strike, ducked the second, and instead of defending against the third, she did something insane. She grabbed his sword, not the blade, that would have severed her fingers, but the forte, the strong section near the guard. Her left hand clamped onto his weapon, while her right brought her own sword around in a thrust aimed at the gap between his shoulder scales. Kriash had never faced an opponent willing to risk mutilation for positional advantage. For a split second, his perfect technique faltered as he processed this unprecedented response. That split second was enough. Sarah's blade found the gap she had targeted, sliding between scales to draw first blood. The wound was shallow. She lacked the strength to drive deeper, but it was real. The arena erupted. In the history of Coalition Challenge combat, only a handful of opponents had managed to wound Karathi warriors. None had been human. Kriash looked down at the blue blood seeping from his shoulder, then back at Sarah with something approaching respect. Interesting technique, human. Painful, but effective. Sarah released his weapon and stepped back, both fighters resetting to fighting distance. Her left hand throbbed where the sword's edge had cut her palm, but the injury was minor compared to what she had accomplished. "Your move," she said. Kriash's fighting style changed. Gone was the methodical precision of earlier exchanges. Now he fought with the intensity of a warrior who had found a worthy opponent, his attacks coming faster and harder than before. Sarah met his renewed assault with everything she had learned in 18 hours of desperate preparation. She fought dirty when necessary, used unconventional techniques when possible, and took risks that would have horrified any sensible person. The battle became a deadly dance, two warriors testing each other's limits in front of an audience that would remember this moment for generations. Sarah knew she couldn't win through conventional means, but she was proving something more important than victory. She was proving that humans didn't break under pressure. Kriash came at her with renewed fury, his curved sword weaving patterns of death through the air. Sarah found herself driven backward, her long sword barely keeping pace with his strikes. Each parry sent shockwaves through her arms, and she could feel her grip weakening against his superior strength. But something had changed in the arena's atmosphere. The crowd no longer watched with clinical detachment. Beings from dozens of species leaned forward in their seats, caught up in a display of combat unlike anything in Coalition records. The human wasn't just surviving, she was adapting. Sarah ducked under a horizontal cut that would have taken her head off, then rolled to the side as Kriash's follow-up thrust scored a furrow in the arena floor where she had been standing. She came up in a guard position she had never used before, sword held in both hands, but angled across her body in a way that confused Karathi tactical analysis. "You fight like no opponent I have faced," Kriash observed, circling her with predatory patience. "Your techniques are unpredictable." Sarah kept her breathing steady despite the burning in her lungs. "Good. Predictable gets you killed." The Karathi warrior paused mid-step, his yellow eyes showing something that might have been amusement. "Indeed. Where did you learn such combat philosophy?" "From losing," Sarah admitted honestly. "Humans learn more from failure than success." Kriash tilted his head in a gesture Sarah had learned indicated curiosity among his species. "Your people study defeat. We study everything that keeps us alive." Sarah shifted her stance slightly, drawing on techniques from different martial traditions, especially our mistakes. The conversation seemed surreal in the middle of mortal combat, but Sarah realized it served a purpose. Every second spent talking was another second to recover, another moment to observe Kriash's patterns and tendencies. More importantly, it was showing the Coalition audience something they hadn't expected, that humans could think strategically even under lethal pressure. An interesting approach, Kriash conceded. Most species prefer to forget their defeats. Most species don't have to evolve on a planet trying to kill them every day. That statement rippled through the arena like a shockwave. Sarah hadn't planned to reveal anything about Earth's nature, but the words had escaped in a moment of raw honesty. Now she realized they might be the most important thing she could have said. General Vextar's voice carried clearly from the command platform. Did she say their homeworld is hostile? Dr. Foster's research data hadn't been classified as military intelligence, but it hadn't been widely distributed either. Most Coalition species evolved on worlds that were merely challenging. Few had faced the specific combination of environmental pressures that had shaped human development. Sarah decided to lean into the revelation. If this challenge was about changing perceptions, she might as well give them the full picture. "Every predator on our world could kill us," she continued, still circling with Kriash. "Every season brought new ways to die, whether that could freeze or cook us. Diseases that swept through populations. Natural disasters that destroyed entire civilizations." Kriash's fighting stance shifted subtly. He was listening now, really listening. "Yet your species survived. We survived by adapting, by learning, by refusing to give up, even when giving up made sense." Sarah brought her sword into a new guard position, one that drew from tournament fencing rather than historical combat. "We survived by being too stubborn to die." The arena fell absolutely silent. Every being in the facility hung on their words, finally understanding something fundamental about the species requesting military partnership. "Humans don't evolve for strength," Sarah continued, her voice carrying clearly in the acoustic space. "We evolve for persistence. We don't stop. We don't break. We find ways to keep going when any sensible species would surrender. Kriash studied her with new interest. You speak as though survival itself is a form of combat. For humans, it is. The Karathi warrior straightened slightly, his weapon lowering just a fraction. Then, perhaps I have underestimated your species' warrior traditions. Perhaps you have. Sarah raised her sword to formal salute position. Shall we continue finding out? Kriash returned the salute with ceremonial precision. Indeed. But, know this, human, you have already earned something few beings achieve in my presence. What's that? Respect. The word echoed through the arena like a pronouncement. Coming from a Korathi battle veteran, it carried weight that transcended the immediate combat. Sarah felt tears threaten her eyes, but blinked them back. This wasn't over yet. They engaged again, but something fundamental had changed. Kriash still fought with deadly skill, but now he fought as though facing a fellow warrior rather than an inferior opponent. His strikes came with the same precision, but different intent, testing her limits rather than simply overwhelming them. Sarah responded by abandoning any pretense of fighting like other species. She used every advantage her humanity offered: creativity, adaptability, the willingness to do things that made no tactical sense, but might create psychological advantages. When Kriash pressed forward with a combination designed to drive her back, Sarah instead threw herself toward him, accepting a glancing blow to her shoulder in order to get inside his weapon's optimal range. Her pommel strike caught him in the solar plexus, or what passed for it in Karathi anatomy. The impact barely affected him physically, but it demonstrated something crucial. The human was willing to take damage to inflict damage. Most species avoided unnecessary harm, but humans seemed to calculate pain as just another tactical resource. Fascinating, Kriash muttered, stepping back to reassess his approach. Sarah pressed her advantage, launching into an attack sequence that borrowed from multiple martial traditions. Her longsword became an extension of her will, probing for weaknesses while creating openings that existed only because her opponent couldn't predict her methods. She scored 2 more minor hits, a cut across Kriash's sword arm that barely penetrated his scales, and a thrust that found the gap between his armor plates but lacked the power to cause serious damage. Each strike drew cheers from parts of the audience, something unprecedented in coalition challenge combat. But Sarah was tiring. Her human endurance was reaching its limits, while Kriash showed few signs of fatigue. She needed to find a way to end this fight before exhaustion gave him an insurmountable advantage. The answer came from an unexpected source: her own earlier words about human persistence. She didn't need to defeat Kriash quickly. She needed to demonstrate that humans didn't give up, even when defeat seemed inevitable. Sarah changed tactics again, shifting to a defensive style designed for endurance rather than aggression. She would show the coalition what human stubbornness looked like under pressure. Kriash adapted to her new approach with professional efficiency, launching a sustained assault meant to wear down her defenses through superior conditioning. His strikes came in measured patterns, each one designed to force her to expend energy on increasingly difficult parries. But Sarah had one advantage the Karathi couldn't account for. She knew exactly what she was fighting for. Every parry represented Earth's future. Every dodge meant her species' children would grow up free. Every moment she stayed on her feet proved that humans belonged among the galaxy's warriors. The fight continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah's world narrowed to the immediate necessities of survival. Read the attack, respond appropriately, find the energy for another defense. Her formal training gave way to pure instinct, her body moving in ways that owed more to desperation than technique. Blood flowed from a dozen minor wounds, both hers and Kriash's. The arena floor became slick and treacherous. Sarah's grip on her sword was compromised by her earlier palm wound, but she adapted by changing her grip entirely, fighting one-handed when necessary. Through it all, she never gave ground unnecessarily, never showed fear. never indicated that she was considering surrender. The crowd's noise grew louder as they realized they were witnessing something historic. This wasn't just challenge combat. This was a statement about what humanity represented in galactic civilization. General Vextar watched from his command platform, his three eyes showing an expression his aide had never seen before. How long has this been going? 14 minutes, 37 seconds, sir. That's longer than any challenge combat in the last 50 years. Vextar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully, and the human shows no signs of yielding. No, sir. If anything, she appears to be adapting to the Karathi's fighting style. That was true. Sarah had begun to read Kriash's patterns, not well enough to predict his attacks, but enough to optimize her responses. Her parries became more efficient. Her counterattacks found better targets. Her movement conserved energy while maintaining defensive effectiveness. Most importantly, she was showing every species in the coalition that humans could learn under pressure. They didn't need perfect training or overwhelming advantages. They needed only opportunity and determination. Kriash recognized the shift as well. His attacks grew more aggressive as he realized his opponent was improving rather than deteriorating. This violated every assumption about challenge combat against clearly inferior opponents. You continue to surprise, human, he admitted between strikes. Sarah managed to grin despite her exhaustion. Just getting warmed up. It was bravado, and they both knew it. But bravado was sometimes the difference between victory and defeat, especially when psychological factors mattered as much as physical ones. The critical moment came when Kriash attempted his most aggressive combination yet, a series of strikes designed to overwhelm any possible defense. Sarah met the first two attacks with desperate parries, but the third came too fast and from an unexpected angle. She couldn't block it, couldn't dodge it, couldn't avoid what looked like a killing blow aimed at her throat. Instead, she did something that defied every instinct of self-preservation. She stepped into the attack, turning what should have been a mortal wound into a glancing cut across her neck. Blood flowed freely, but she was still alive, still fighting, now inside Kriash's guard with her sword positioned for a potentially decisive strike. The arena held its breath. Sarah's blade rested against a gap in Kriash's armor, positioned over what her briefings had identified as a critical blood vessel. One thrust would end the fight permanently. But she didn't thrust. Instead, she met Kriash's eyes and spoke loudly enough for every being in the arena to hear. "Do you yield?" The question stunned everyone present. Sarah had achieved a position where she could kill her opponent, but instead of taking the certain victory, she was offering him the chance to surrender with honor. Kriash stared at her for a long moment, yellow eyes showing emotions that coalition translators couldn't interpret. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the silent arena. "I yield." The words hit the crowd like a physical force. Cheers erupted from beings who had never cheered for anything in their lives. The human had done more than survive. She had won, and one with a mercy that redefined how the coalition understood courage. Sarah stepped back and lowered her sword, exhaustion finally claiming her. She had proven everything that needed proving, but more than that, she had shown the galaxy what human courage really looked like. Kriash raised his weapon in formal salute. "You fight with honor, human. Your species will make worthy warriors." Sarah returned the salute with hands that shook from fatigue and adrenaline. "Thank you, battle veteran. It was an honor to face you." As medical teams rushed onto the arena floor, General Vextar's voice echoed through the facility. Challenge combat concluded. Victory to the human representative. Military partnership status granted pending final ratification. Sarah collapsed to her knees as the words sank in. She had done it. Humanity would take its place among the galaxy's warrior races, not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they had shown they possessed the one quality that mattered most. They had courage. But even as celebration erupted around her, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Earning the right to fight alongside coalition forces was only the first step. Now humanity would have to prove they belonged on the battlefield, facing enemies who wouldn't show the honor Kriyash had demonstrated. The real test was yet to come. 3 months after the arena challenge, Sarah stood on the bridge of the Coalition warship Stellar Harmony, watching the tactical display with growing concern. The Ravager fleet had appeared at the edge of the system 12 hours ago, their black ships moving in formation toward the inhabited worlds of Kethera Prime. Status report. Admiral Morrison requested from his position at the command center. The Coalition had granted him temporary tactical command of the human contingent, a force of 2,000 Marines who had arrived just days before the Ravager incursion. 37 enemy vessels confirmed, reported Commander Thexval, the ship's Xerian tactical officer. Standard Ravager configuration. Heavy assault ships supported by fighter squadrons. They'll reach Kethera Prime in 14 hours at current velocity. Sarah studied the display with the eye of someone who had spent months learning Coalition military doctrine. The Ravagers were one of the galaxy's most feared pirate confederations, but they rarely attacked systems under Coalition protection. This incursion suggested either desperation or confidence in their ability to overwhelm local defenses. What about Coalition response? Morrison asked. The Third Fleet is engaged in the Outer Rim campaigns. Thexval's translator rendered his words with mechanical precision. Nearest reinforcements are 6 days away at maximum hyperspace velocity. Morrison's expression didn't change, but Sarah could read the tension in his posture. They were facing an enemy fleet with insufficient forces, no support, and responsibility for protecting 12 million Ketheran civilians. General Vextar appeared on the bridge's main screen, broadcasting from the Coalition command vessel Justice Ascendant. His 3 eyes showed the strain of commanding a desperate defense. Admiral Morrison, your forces will be integrated with our defensive perimeter. The Karathi battle group will anchor our center, with supporting units positioned according to standard doctrine. Morrison nodded formally. Understood, General. What do you want, my people? Reserve position. Your Marines lack experience with Coalition tactics, so they will support primary forces as needed. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Reserve position meant the humans would be kept away from critical combat, used only for cleanup operations or emergency reinforcement. It was a rational decision based on human military experience, but it also meant they wouldn't have the opportunity to prove their worth. After Vextar ended the transmission, Morrison turned to his staff. Opinions. Commander Parks studied the tactical situation. He's not wrong, sir. Our people trained with Coalition equipment for 3 months. The Karathi have been using these systems for decades. But, Sarah added carefully, reserve position also means we won't contribute meaningfully to the defense. If the Coalition fails here, our military partnership status won't survive the political aftermath. Morrison walked to the bridge viewport, staring out at the stars where enemy ships moved with predatory patience. What do you think they're really testing, Ambassador? Sarah considered the question. Whether humans can function as part of Coalition military doctrine, or whether we'll always be outsiders who require special handling. And our answer depends on how creative we're willing to be. Morrison turned back to his staff, and Sarah saw the decision forming behind his eyes. Commander Park, I want detailed analysis of Ravager tactical patterns. Dr. Foster, anything you can tell us about their species composition and psychological profiles? Ambassador Chun, you'll coordinate with Coalition Command, but I want you to identify opportunities for human initiative. Sir, Park said carefully. General Vextar was clear about our role. He was clear about our assignment, Morrison corrected. How we execute that assignment is up to us. Over the following hours, Sarah watched the human contingent prepare for battle with characteristic thoroughness. Morrison's Marines had trained extensively with Coalition weapons and equipment, but they retained distinctly human approaches to problem solving. The Ravagers used pack tactics. Dr. Foster briefed the command staff. Each ship type serves a specific role, but they're not adaptable when their formations are disrupted. Think wolf pack hunting patterns, effective until something unexpected happens. Commander Park's analysis revealed similar patterns. Their attack doctrine assumes predictable defensive responses. They probe for weaknesses, then concentrate overwhelming force against identified targets. Sarah studied both reports while monitoring coalition communications. The defense plan was textbook coalition doctrine, layered defensive positions, mutual support between unit types, coordinated responses to specific threat profiles. It was professionally competent and completely predictable. That's the problem, she realized aloud. Morrison looked up from his own tactical analysis. What is? The coalition is responding exactly the way Ravager tactical doctrine expects. Every defensive position, every unit deployment, every support protocol, it's all standard practice. You're suggesting we deviate from proven defensive strategies? Sarah pulled up the tactical display, highlighting specific formations. I'm suggesting that humans might see opportunities other species miss, just like in the arena. The parallel was obvious once she stated it. Kriash had expected conventional combat responses and had been confounded by human adaptability. The Ravagers expected conventional defensive responses and might be equally vulnerable to unexpected tactics. Morrison studied the data for long minutes. What did you have in mind? Sarah's plan was audacious in its simplicity. While coalition forces maintained standard defensive positions, the human Marines would deploy in ways that violated established doctrine, but exploited specific Ravager vulnerabilities. It's risky, Park warned. If we're wrong about their response patterns, we'll be out of position when they need us most. If we're right, Morrison replied, we might give the coalition something they haven't had in this war. Surprise. Sarah opened a communication channel to General Vextar. General, Admiral Morrison requests permission to deploy human forces in forward reconnaissance positions. Vextar's 3 eyes showed surprise. That is not standard protocol for reserve units. Human tactics emphasize independent operation and adaptability, Sarah explained carefully. We believe we can provide intelligence and harassment capabilities that complement your main defense. The general considered the request. From his perspective, letting the humans operate independently solved the problem of integrating inexperienced forces into established tactical systems. If they succeeded, the coalition gained useful intelligence. If they failed, the loss wouldn't compromise critical defensive positions. Permission granted, Vextar decided. But maintain communication protocols and do not engage primary enemy formations without authorization. Morrison smiled grimly as the transmission ended. He just gave us exactly what we need, freedom to operate. The next 8 hours were a masterclass in human military preparation. Morrison's Marines deployed in small, highly mobile units positioned throughout the outer system. Each unit carried coalition standard equipment, but operated according to human tactical doctrine emphasizing initiative, adaptability, and independent decision-making. Sarah monitored their deployments from the Stellar Harmonious Command Center, watching as human forces took positions that made no sense according to coalition military theory, but perfect sense according to human understanding of asymmetric warfare. Units Alpha through Delta are in position, Commander Park reported. Echo and Foxtrot teams are standing by for rapid deployment. Morrison nodded. Remember, we're not trying to stop the Ravager fleet. We're trying to disrupt their tactical confidence and create opportunities for the main defensive forces. When the Ravager attack began, it unfolded exactly as coalition intelligence had predicted. The enemy fleet deployed in standard formations, probed the defensive perimeter with light forces, and began concentrating firepower against identified strong points. For the first hour, everything went according to both sides' expectations. Coalition forces responded with textbook defensive tactics, while Ravager commanders executed time-tested assault patterns. Then, the human Marines made their presence known. Alpha teams struck the Ravager reconnaissance screen with a precision raid that eliminated 3 scout ships before vanishing back into the asteroid field. Bravo team disabled a communication relay that disrupted enemy coordination protocols. Charlie team used improvised explosive devices to mine hyperspace exit points, forcing Ravager reinforcements into suboptimal deployment positions. None of these actions were decisive individually, but their cumulative effect was profound. The Ravager fleet found itself operating in an environment where their carefully planned tactics were constantly disrupted by unpredictable harassment attacks. What are the humans doing? General Vextar's transmission carried confusion rather than anger. Their attack patterns do not match any recognized tactical doctrine. Sarah smiled as she responded. They're improvising, General. Human military doctrine emphasizes adaptation and creative problem-solving. On the tactical display, she could see the effect of human operations. Ravager formations were becoming less coordinated as their commanders dealt with unexpected threats. Ships were being diverted from primary objectives to respond to harassment attacks. The psychological impact of facing unpredictable opponents was beginning to show in enemy decision-making. Fascinating, Vextar Muset. They are treating space combat like guerrilla warfare. Human military history includes extensive experience with asymmetric conflict, Sarah explained. Our people learned long ago that direct confrontation isn't always the best approach. The turning point came when Morrison executed the most audacious part of his plan. While Ravager attention was focused on coalition defensive positions, Echo and Foxtrot teams conducted a boarding action against the enemy flagship. The attack violated every principle of space combat doctrine. Small forces didn't board large warships. Ground troops didn't engage in void warfare. Reserve units didn't initiate independent operations against primary targets. But human Marines weren't following coalition doctrine. They were following their own understanding of warfare as an extension of problem-solving, and the Ravager flagship represented a problem that could be solved through creative application of force. The boarding action succeeded because no one had ever attempted it before. Ravager defensive systems were designed to repel ship-to-ship attacks, not squads of humans in powered armor using coalition breaching equipment in ways its designers had never imagined. Within 30 minutes, Echo and Foxtrot teams had captured the enemy command center and transmitted Ravager battle plans to coalition forces. The intelligence windfall allowed General Vextar to anticipate enemy movements and position defensive forces for maximum effect. How do they accomplish this? Vextar asked, studying the tactical displays with obvious amazement. Morrison answered from his position aboard the captured Ravager flagship. Human doctrine emphasizes doing what the enemy doesn't expect, General. Sometimes the most effective tactic is the one no one else would consider. The battle's outcome was no longer in doubt. With their command structure compromised and their tactical plans exposed, the Ravager fleet found itself outmaneuvered at every turn. Coalition forces pressed their advantage with professional efficiency, driving the enemy back toward the system's edge. But, more importantly, the human contribution had transformed how coalition leadership viewed their newest military partners. These weren't just additional troops following established doctrine. They were force multipliers who brought entirely new capabilities to coalition warfare. As the last Ravager ships fled the system, Sarah felt a familiar sense of accomplishment. Once again, humanity had proven that courage came in many forms, and sometimes the most valuable contribution was the willingness to think differently about impossible problems. Admiral Morrison, General Vextar's transmission showed something approaching respect. I believe the coalition has significantly underestimated human military potential. Morrison smiled as he surveyed the captured enemy vessel. General, I think you're about to discover that this is just the beginning. The defense of Kethra Prime had ended in complete coalition victory, but its real significance lay in what it revealed about humanity's role in galactic warfare. They weren't just another species with soldiers. They were innovators who could change the nature of conflict itself. And in the vast galaxy full of threats and challenges, that innovation might be exactly what the coalition needed to secure lasting peace. The victory celebration would be brief, however. Intelligence gathered from the Capture Ravager flagship revealed something that chilled every being who read the reports. This attack had been a probing action, designed to test Coalition responses for something much larger. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the Coalition's war room deep within the fortress moon of Terminus Station. The holographic display showed a galaxy on fire, red markers indicating Ravager fleet positions, desperate blue Coalition forces struggling to contain an invasion that had exploded across 50 systems simultaneously. The situation is untenable, General Vextar announced to the assembled Coalition leadership. Intelligence estimates suggest the Ravager Confederation has assembled over 2,000 vessels for this campaign. Our own forces number fewer than 800 ships capable of frontline combat. Admiral Morrison studied the tactical display with the grim expression of someone who had spent his career preparing for hopeless situations. What about reinforcement from member species? 12 Coalition worlds have fallen in the past month, Commander Thexval reported. Member species are recalling their fleets to defend their home worlds. We cannot blame them for prioritizing their own survival. Sarah watched the strategic situation deteriorate in real time. Every hour brought new reports of Ravager victories, Coalition retreats, civilian populations fleeing toward the galactic core. The Confederation had clearly spent years preparing for this moment, building an overwhelming force designed to shatter Coalition power permanently. There is one factor we have not yet fully utilized, General Vextar said, his three eyes focusing on the human delegation. Admiral Morrison, your forces have demonstrated capabilities that exceed our initial assessments. What can humanity contribute to our defense? Morrison's answer was immediate. Everything we have, General. But you need to understand that human military doctrine requires operational independence to be fully effective. Explain. Sarah stepped forward to provide context. Coalition tactics emphasize coordination between different species capabilities. Human tactics emphasize adaptation and innovation. We function best when given objectives rather than specific methods. Vextar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. You are requesting command authority? We're requesting the freedom to fight the way humans fight, Morrison clarified. Your tactical doctrine is superb for conventional warfare between comparable forces. But this isn't conventional warfare. The Ravagers have overwhelming numerical superiority. The implications hung in the air like a challenge. The Coalition could continue fighting according to established doctrine and face inevitable defeat, or they could trust their newest members with unprecedented authority. Dr. Foster provided the scientific perspective that tipped the balance. General, human military history includes extensive examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through tactical innovation. Our species evolved under constant pressure to find creative solutions to impossible problems. What do you propose? Vextar asked. Morrison activated his personal tactical display, showing deployment patterns that made no sense according to Coalition military theory. We propose abandoning traditional defensive strategies in favor of distributed warfare designed to exploit Ravager organizational weaknesses. The plan was audacious beyond anything attempted in Coalition history. Instead of concentrating forces to defend critical systems, Morrison proposed scattering human units throughout Ravager-occupied territory to conduct sustained harassment operations. Each unit would operate independently, targeting enemy logistics, communications, and morale. This violates every principle of defensive warfare, Commander Thexval protested. Small forces operating behind enemy lines will be overwhelmed and destroyed. Not if they refuse to fight on the enemy's terms, Sarah replied. Humans don't win battles through superior strength, General. We win by making our enemies fight battles they don't know how to fight. Morrison expanded his tactical display to show specific operational concepts. Ravager doctrine assumes predictable Coalition responses, concentrated fleets, defensive positions, conventional engagement patterns. They've planned for everything except opponents who ignore those conventions entirely. The debate continued for hours, with Coalition leadership struggling to understand tactics that seemed to violate basic military logic. But Gradually, the desperate nature of their situation made Morrison's proposal seem less insane and more like their only chance. You understand the risks? Vextar asked finally. If human forces are destroyed in these operations, you will have no meaningful military presence remaining. Morrison met the general's gaze steadily. General, if we don't try this, none of us will have any meaningful presence remaining. The decision was made with the weight of galactic civilization hanging in the balance. Morrison received unprecedented authority to deploy human forces according to his own tactical judgment, while coalition fleets would maintain conventional defensive positions to anchor remaining strongholds. Within 48 hours, human Marines were deploying throughout Ravager-occupied space in operations that redefined the concept of military courage. Sarah watched them go with a mixture of pride and terror, knowing that each unit was embarking on missions with minimal support and maximum danger. The results became apparent within weeks. Ravager supply lines began experiencing mysterious disruptions. Communication networks suffered cascade failures that crippled fleet coordination. Forward bases faced constant harassment that prevented effective operations. Most importantly, Ravager morale began to deteriorate as their forces found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't predict, locate, or defeat through conventional means. How are they accomplishing this? The intercepted Ravager transmission crackled with frustration. Our intelligence identifies human force strength at fewer than 10,000 troops, yet they appear to be everywhere simultaneously. Sarah smiled as she listened to enemy communications from her position aboard the Coalition command vessel. Human forces were indeed everywhere, but not in the way Ravager commanders understood. Morrison's Marines operated in small teams that struck without warning, vanished before retaliation, and coordinated their attacks to create the illusion of overwhelming presence. They're learning what we discovered in the arena, Sarah told General Vextar. Humans don't fight the way other species expect. The psychological impact proved more devastating than the physical damage. Ravager fleets began deploying defensive formations designed to counter threats that might not exist. Supply convoys required massive escorts that couldn't be spared from primary operations. Commanders hesitated to execute planned attacks because they couldn't predict human responses. 3 months into the campaign, the strategic situation had fundamentally changed. Ravager numerical superiority meant nothing when they couldn't bring their forces to bear effectively. Coalition defensive positions held because enemy attacks lacked the coordination necessary for breakthrough operations. But the real transformation was happening within coalition leadership itself. Species that had viewed humans as junior partners began recognizing them as invaluable allies who brought unique capabilities to galactic warfare. Your people have redefined military science, General Vextar admitted during a strategy conference. We believe courage meant facing superior enemies in direct combat. Humans have shown us that true courage means refusing to accept impossible odds as decisive. Morrison nodded diplomatically, but Sarah could see the satisfaction in his expression. Humanity had proven more than their military worth. They had proven their value as innovators who could change the nature of conflict itself. The campaign's climax came when Morrison proposed the ultimate application of human tactical doctrine, a direct assault on the Ravager homeworld of Gethera, protected by the largest fleet concentration in Confederation history. The proposal is suicidal, Commander Thexval stated flatly. Intelligence estimates suggest over 300 vessels defending their capital system, which is exactly why they won't expect it, Morrison replied. Every principle of military logic says we should avoid their strongest position. So that's exactly where we need to strike. Sarah understood the plan's psychological brilliance. The Ravagers had grown paranoid about human unpredictability, but they still assumed certain limitations. No force would be insane enough to attack their most heavily defended system with insufficient numbers and no support. What makes you think this will work? Vextar asked. Morrison's answer reflected months of studying enemy behavior patterns. Because the one thing they can't defend against is their own assumptions about what's possible. The assault on Gethra was launched with a combined force of coalition and human vessels, but the tactical execution was pure human innovation. Instead of conventional fleet engagement, the attack resembled a massive raids in space. Simultaneous strikes at multiple targets designed to overwhelm defensive coordination. Human Marines boarded enemy vessels while coalition ships engaged their escorts. Small craft penetrated defensive perimeters while capital ships drew fire. Electronic warfare specialists disrupted communication networks while assault teams captured critical installations. The battle lasted 18 hours and defied every principle of space combat doctrine. When it ended, the Ravager Confederation's central government had surrendered unconditionally, and their fleet commanders were requesting amnesty in exchange for cooperation. How? The captured Ravager war leader asked Admiral Morrison during surrender negotiations. Your forces were outnumbered 5-1. Our defensive positions were impregnable. Our fleet coordination was perfect. Morrison's answer would be studied in coalition military academies for generations. You prepared for everything except opponents who don't follow the rules you think govern warfare. The victory celebration on Terminus Station lasted 3 days, with beings from dozens of species honoring the human contribution to galactic security. But, for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came when battle veteran Kriash approached her during the ceremony. Ambassador, the Karathi warrior spoke with the respect reserved for proven allies. When we fought in the arena, I believed I was testing your courage. I was wrong. Sarah looked up at the towering alien, who had become an unlikely friend. How so? Courage is not what I thought, Kriash explained. I believed it meant facing death without fear. You have taught the galaxy that true courage means changing the nature of the fight itself. As Sarah looked around the celebration, she saw the future of human coalition relations taking shape. Humanity had earned more than military partnership. They had earned recognition as innovators whose unique perspective could solve problems other species couldn't even recognize. General Vextar's final assessment would become the foundation of new coalition military doctrine. We learned that courage has many faces. The Karathi show us courage in discipline and honor. The Zirions demonstrate courage through precision and duty. But humans have shown us something different. The courage to reimagine what's possible when everything seems hopeless. Sarah smiled as she thought of Earth's children, who would grow up in a galaxy where humanity was recognized not as clients or junior partners, but as equals who had proven their worth through the most fundamental test imaginable. They had shown the galaxy that humans possessed something rarer than strength or speed or natural weapons. They possessed the courage to be different, to think creatively, to find new solutions when old approaches failed. In a vast universe full of challenges yet to be discovered, that kind of courage would prove invaluable time and again. The human journey among the stars had truly begun, not as followers or imitators, but as innovators who could change the very nature of what civilization meant. And in the years to come, when new threats emerged and impossible challenges arose, the galaxy would turn to humanity with a single question: what would you do differently? The answer would always be the same: let us show you. The real war was yet to begin. The real fight was just beginning. The next 18 hours would determine whether humanity took its place as an equal partner in galactic civilization, or remained forever marked as the species too frightened to fight for their own dignity.